Okay, hi all. Thank you so much for joining us. We saw quite a few of you that had joined us early. Thank you so much for being so attentive and joining us here for our second forum related to the Redwood Life Precise Plan and EIR. And this forum is on the Westport Landfill. My name is Dave, and I'm part of the consultant team, a few of which will meet here tonight along with our panelists. So let's go ahead and get to the next slide. Just want to just quickly give you a lay of the land of how we are going to do the input from you all as we go through this process. You'll notice that there's the Q&A function available, the toolbar at the bottom of your window. That will give you a chance to ask any questions or give us comments throughout the presentation. Those comments that we could answer in real time related to process, we'll do our best during the presentations, but we're most likely going to answer the questions related to the presentation here tonight after you see all three presentations. There might be some questions that aren't related to what we're talking about here tonight, and we'll let you know if those can't be answered tonight. And then our hope is to take all of these questions, and those that we can't answer tonight we'll respond to during as part of the summary of this meeting. So keep an eye out for that as well. But I'm sure you all have been part of webinars in the past. It's very easy to function to go ahead and click that button and pose your comment or question, and we'll go from there. We can go to the next slide. So before we get started, what we like to do for all of the interaction we have with the community is just gauge who we're communicating with. And this again gives us a chance to course correct as we go through the process if needed to make sure that we're reaching all segments of the community and gaining all perspectives. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and bring up a quick poll right now, and you'll see it pop up on your screen. And this is, again, it's a very simple demographics poll that asks basic questions about how you're connected to the Redwood Shores area, if you've been part of previous involvement with this project, what best describes your housing situation, and then the standard demographic questions of age and ethnicity. And then lastly, we're also interested how you heard about this meeting. Again, just to gauge how well we're doing in getting the word out and seeing what methods are working best. So I'm just going to give you all a couple more minutes here to plug in. And then we'll go ahead and get going here. Thanks all again for joining, and thanks for your patience as we go through this process. I see we have about 30 people joining, which is excellent. So I'm just going to wait maybe 10 more seconds here to see if we get a few more folks to take the survey. And then what I'm going to do is end the poll, and I'll share results back out so that you all can see the results as well before we jump into the presentation. I think we got a pretty good critical mass here, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. And we could always bring this back up if more folks want to contribute. So I'm going to share the results out just real quick so you all could see it. And again, this will be part of the summary that we put together at the end or after this meeting as well. So I won't go through all the specifics. I will say it looks like the email and social media is working to reach with you all, which is fantastic. And it looks like quite a few of you have participated in meetings in the past. So I will go ahead and stop sharing now, and we'll go to the next slide. So I just wanted to kind of give you a quick overview here of what we're doing tonight. I kind of took care of the opening and welcome for Jeff here tonight. We do have members of city staff with us that will be available during the Q&A, including the Director of Community Development, Jeff Schwab. After I'm done talking here, Troy's part of the consultant team, are going to give you an overview of the history and background related to the landfill. And then we're really excited to have panelists here with us tonight from both the county and Regional Water Quality Control Board that are going to provide us some perspective as well. That'll be coming from both Allens that you see there, And Keith is also available for the Q&A after that. So we want to reserve plenty of time to hear from you all, gather your questions, and be able to answer those that we can. And we should have a good, at least a half, if not more than half of the meeting here tonight, to be able to get to that. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Troy to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. So as Dave said, just to kick us off, I'll go ahead and give us a quick high-level refresher on the precise plan, the city-led process, the EIR, and the plan process. I'll delve briefly into the site history, and then give a quick overview of some of the relevant regulations and controls that are enforced by the agencies that we have here as our guests tonight. And then our guests will go into greater detail on those best practices relating to the maintenance and monitoring of former landfills, such as the Westport landfill. And then again, as Dave said, we'll go ahead and open it up for a group question and answer session. So as I did during the first virtual forum, which was focused on sea level rise, I'll first give a quick overview of where we are on this process, what we've done, and where we're coming to next. And then I'll give a little bit of background on the topic tonight, which is the landfill. So as most of you know, in 2023, in response largely to community concerns, the City Council initiated the planning and environmental review process, which is centered around engagement led by this team and by the city, including virtual forums such as this one and the in-person workshops we've held at the library. This effort really focuses on the creation of a compromised alternative that will be studied at an equal level during the CEQA environmental analysis process. The city and our team is also undertaking a thorough analysis of the community benefits and the fiscal impacts related to the project proposed and also the alternative developed with input from the community. Just to reiterate, the precise plan and EIR is a city-led process, not an applicant-led process, that will ultimately result in a detailed planning document and the CEQA program that will govern any and all future redevelopment of the Redwood Life Site. Most of us should be pretty familiar by now with the plan area. Here's, just for our refresher, a map of the 80 areas in question, shown in yellow. The area is located between the Belmont Slough, a very ecologically sensitive area, and then the neighborhood Redwood Shores to the south. It's accessed primarily off Marine Parkway. Study area also includes approximately 1 mile section of the Bay Trail. You can see in red the Redwood Shores Branch Library at the southern tip of the project area, where we'll be holding an in-person meeting in the coming weeks. Just a reminder that this plan is not a plan for the entire Redwood Shores community. However, the potential impacts of any development within the plan area are a key consideration for this effort. The city is holding this webinar to provide the community with a better understanding of the policy and regulatory framework within which the plan and the EIR will operate. The site is currently home to 20 two-story buildings with approximately 25 tenants and approximately 1,500 employees on site in R&D and life sciences. These buildings represent approximately 1 million total square feet. At full occupancy, these buildings could accommodate nearly 4,000 employees. Here's the project work plan. We're focused on the area highlighted in blue here. This part of the plan is really focused, as I said before, on the development of project alternatives. In addition to tonight's event, we'll be featuring several additional opportunities for engagement, 2 more webinars, an upcoming workshop, and a presentation to the City Council and Planning Commission, which will cover both the technical analysis and the community feedback input we've received to date. After the alternative is selected, we will then move into the precise plan and EIR development phase. This slide gives a bit of a background on our upcoming engagement events, which we're excited to be holding with you all in the upcoming weeks. Feel free to click or use the QR code to visit the website for further details. The next event we'll be holding is a webinar on Thursday, January 30th. We'll be reviewing their findings from our sensitivity analyses focused on traffic, utilities, and preliminary environmental impacts. Just a quick kind of note, if folks could please try to hold off asking questions tonight about the sensitivity analyses. We would appreciate that since our experts are not here tonight, but they will be available during that event to answer questions about the sensitivity analysis. Next, we'll be hosting the third and final virtual forum focused on life sciences on Thursday, February 6th. The next in-person community workshop will be held February 12th at the library. The main focus will be to present and discuss and review the potential project alternatives. This will be accompanied by an online survey that will be open to anyone to receive and share feedback on the alternatives. Then finally, we'll have an update to a joint session of City Council and Planning Commission on Tuesday, March 4th. So now I'll briefly get into tonight's topic with a quick background and history of the landfill and some other information about environmental controls and regulations that apply to landfills generally and Westport specifically. These are all key issues for our city-led precise plan and EIR, and as I mentioned, will be investigated in greater detail by our guests afterward. So in the state here, there are a number of key agencies that oversee the many regulations and controls that apply to former landfills, including CalRecycle, DTSC, local enforcement agencies, which vary from region to region, and of course, other regional agencies such as the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Representatives from those two agencies are here tonight. We're excited to have them as our guests since they are clearly relevant for this landfill. Dealing with former landfill sites presents a unique set of challenges that must be addressed to ensure the safety of structures and human health, often including settlement, unstable soils, landfill gas, leachate contamination, which is when water passes through solid waste and extracts or leaches chemicals from that solid waste. Some of the environmental control measures typically used on former landfills include specialized building techniques, ventilation and management of methane gas, piping of leachate, monitoring of groundwater and surface water. These controls occur during many phases, including the permitting, construction, and operations, often over the course of many decades. Here are a couple aerial snapshots to show how the Westport landfill has evolved over time. The area was predominantly a wetlands until the early 1900s when it was dredged for use as a pasture and hog farm. In the 1910s, an early levee was installed around the perimeter. A portion of the site began operating as a landfill from approximately 1948 to 1970. Most of the operations ceased in 1970. Some disposal of fill and grading continued until 1988, when the site fully ceased operations as a landfill. Approximately half of the site was used for disposal of solid waste and other non-hazardous materials, such as debris and ash. Approximately 600,000 total cubic yards of fill material was disposed of at the site on top of unlined bay mud. The initial development of the former landfill site was guided initially by the Westport Specific Plan. Specific Plan was adopted by the city in 1985, updated in 1995, and facilitated development of the existing office park we see today. In the middle image, you can see the buildings as they were in the process of being constructed in 1997. At the time that it was built, Redwood Life was considered one of the more ambitious redevelopment projects ever completed on a landfill. And lastly, on the right, you see the site it is today. This image shows the extent of the landfill itself on the site. The orange line shows the known extent of the refuse itself buried underneath the site. The green line shows the extent of what's called the cap and the perimeter wall, which is a hard clay barrier that encloses the refuse on top and the sides. Waste material disposed of at the site consists of materials such as solid waste, paper, glass, wood, and ash from incinerator uses. This map shows in the dark blue the extent of the historic slough channel that used to pass through the site before it was a landfill, when it was predominantly wetlands. So this is a really important consideration for us to think of about when we're looking at potential groundwater and leachate contamination. This slide highlights a selection of some important studies that were and other assessments that were conducted on Westport. It is not a comprehensive list, but I'll briefly review some of these. When the landfill was closed in the late 80s, excuse me, a series of studies was conducted in the 90s, including a solid waste assessment test, which did not find any significant organic compounds or metals in the soil. Subsequently, a human health risk assessment was completed as part of the EIR for the initial office park development, which did not find or identify any unacceptable levels of risk of cancer for the planned land uses on the site. A CERCLA, or Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act report, was conducted and completed under EPA oversight in 1990, in part at the request of the Peninsula Homeowners Association. This CERCLA found no evidence of industrial waste in the former landfill. A deep boring effort was completed in 1995 to determine the specific characteristics of the soil and the waste. These were a series of deep borings down to 140 feet deep. 3 separate phase 1 ESA, or environmental site assessment studies, have been conducted, each one building on the last. The key issue identified by all these studies was the leachate waste discharges as being a key potential concern, as well as the methane release potential. Monitoring of groundwater and landfill gas at the site has been ongoing since the 80s and early 2000s, respectively. Volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, have been detected at various points within the barrier wall, but have remained localized within the barrier wall and cap. Active ventilation systems were installed until 2018 after a detection of methane levels above the lower explosive limit were detected. Settlement has been an issue, an ongoing issue, which will need to be addressed and mitigated in any future redevelopment of the site. In addition to these monitoring systems, the county visually evaluates the landfill every few months to check for potential waste exposure or releases. As I mentioned previously, and some of us are well aware, the 2 main regulatory agencies responsible for Westport are the SF Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board and the San Mateo County Department of Environmental Health. Those are our 2 guests today. The landfill is subject to a water board order, which dictates several required measures, including the clay cap, perimeter barrier wall, leachate collecting system, the active methane gas venting and monitoring system, groundwater monitoring wells, compliance with CalRecycle standards, and various ongoing and regular inspections and monitoring programs. This slide visually shows the key components of the landfill and its various monitoring systems that I mentioned on the slide before, including the clay cap and barrier wall, which is shown, the cap is shown in the light green over top of the refuse. The barrier wall is circled in orange and located on either side of the mound. The leachate collection and piping system, which is highlighted in red on the left-hand side, approximately a dozen leachate collection pipes located along the southern edge of the site. The methane barrier and ventilation system, shown in the purple underneath each of the buildings, which is located on the landfill mound. And finally, the groundwater table, shown as the dashed blue line. There are numerous groundwater monitoring wells across the site, both at shallow and at deep depths. The clay cap was actually reconstructed in the mid-90s pursuant to a plan, a cap reconstruction plan at the Water Board's request. So this slide ties back actually to our first informational forum about sea level rise. So recently, the Water Board recognized the potential danger and threat posed by rising seas to landfills on the bayfront, and as a consequence, adopted Order R20031, which includes and covers the Westport landfill. This order requires that operators of bayfront landfills submit a long-term flood protection plan. This plan must include a climate change vulnerability assessment, an adaptation plan that accounts for 100-year storm events and for sea level rise projections for both 2050 and 2100. Updates to this plan are required every 5 years, which incorporate any observed changes to the site and the latest sea level rise projections. The landfills must maintain tracking monuments in order to track subsidence and settlement and integrate any findings into their adaptation plans. Similarly, reports must be submitted to the GeoTracker portal and signed by licensed professionals. The plan that has been submitted by the Westport operator, Longfellow, is available on our website via the QR code here, which links to the resource on our website. And as tonight's guests will discuss in more detail, monitoring and regular inspections of the Westport landfill by the county and the water board will continue long into the future. If and when any redevelopment is approved on this site, additional waste characterizations and delineation studies, likely based on a LiDAR type of study, will be required to be conducted under the oversight of these regulatory agencies as part of permitting and construction monitoring. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dave for our guest speakers.
Great. Thank you so much, Troy. So next, if you want to bring up the next slide, we'll just give a quick overview again of who's here with us. We have Alan Chu from the county, from the environmental health, as an environmental health specialist. He will be presenting here next, followed by Alan Friedman, as you can see here from the Water Resource Control Board, or the Regional Water Quality Control Board. That's a mouthful. And he will be presenting after Alan, and we also have Keith with us that will be a resource during the Q&A. And I'll let them give a quick background of themselves as well as they go ahead and present. So we're going to go ahead and switch screens here real quick. So I'll ask Troy to stop sharing, and then Alan, you should hopefully be able to bring up your screen. Excellent. And over to you, Alan.
Okay, perfect. So thank you all for the opportunity to present today. My name is Alan Chu. I'm the current solid waste program lead here at San Mateo County Environmental Health. And we'll be talking a little bit about post-closure land use and the post-closure development building inspection program. Was touched a little bit earlier in the slides. We do conduct a regulatory oversight of the closed disposal site, but we also have a more local function where we take a look at the individual buildings on these disposal sites, the post-closure development buildings. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So we'll go ahead and get started. For a little bit of background, I have been here in San Mateo County for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was environmental health specialist over in Contra Costa County, also as the LEA. A little technical difficulty as I'm advancing slides. Okay. So just a really quick presentation roadmap here. A couple of the talking points that I'll be going through today. Who we are, San Mateo Environmental Health Services as the local enforcement agency. As I mentioned, we'll also be talking a little bit about our closed landfill oversight and the post-closure development building inspection program that we have here in San Mateo County. Broad overview of post-closure development, governing laws and regulations, a little bit of history, post-closure development then versus how it is now, some public health and safety, development criteria that we take a look at, the importance of engineers' perspective and construction considerations, and then lessons learned along the way. So who we are, San Mateo County Environmental Health Services. We're designated as the local enforcement agency, so you may hear me use some abbreviations, LEA. And so, that is our agency here within Environmental Health Services. We are certified by the state's Department of Resources Recycling and Recovery. You'll hear that referred to as CalRecycle. I know here from the demographic poll that we conducted, we have a number of residents here who have a deep history and understanding of closed disposal sites. So you may formally refer to CalRecycle as the Waste Board, Integrated Waste Management Board. But ultimately, this is going to be that same branch of the California Environmental Protection Agency. And they give us that authority as the LEA within San Mateo County for oversight of those solid waste facilities and closed disposal sites among them. LEA staff work as part of our solid waste program here within the Division of Environmental Health Services, which is under the County Health Department. So we'll go over kind of briefly, not in too much detail, the governing laws and regulations. Our authority is derived from the Public Resources Code, but you'll also hear me referencing a number of our regulations throughout this presentation. Our regulations come from the California Code of Regulations, and primarily in Title 14 and 27, which set the state minimum standards for solid waste handling, disposal, and ultimately the protection of public health and the environment. Just a quick disclaimer, it's a lot of text here, but really I always kind of like to put this as, material presented is informational. You heard a lot about that kind of alphabet soup, a number of different agencies involved. So the state does issue their kind of state minimum standards, but they also provide guidance. And so, nothing said in this presentation should be understood to conflict with that established guidance or any kind of regulations or state interpretation. You're also going to see in this presentation some figures, renderings, and drawings from other third-party companies. These are going to be other consultants, other engineering firms. And so these are going to be figures that have been approved by the county, and we're using them purely as reference materials, not to be understood as any kind of endorsement of any specific company or any of those specific sites that you're going to see here. But we do provide their letterhead as a way to credit their design, but these are just approved figures that you'll see. So just kind of a quick disclaimer to get all that out of the way. And we'll drill really into Title 27, which sets the performance standards and requirements for the closure of these sites and the ultimate reuse or the post-closure development of these sites. We're going to be talking a little bit about Redwood Shores, but also to give you some context, some of the other sites throughout San Mateo County that have received oversight and have also been developed responsibly. You're going to hear me talk a little bit about a pre-88 versus post-88. This is 1988 distinction for some of these sites, and kind of synonymous with what I refer to as kind of legacy sites. You have disposal sites that did not complete closure prior to 1988, and that's going to be prior to the implementation of the closure regulations. But that new post-closure activities, which may impact the closed landfill, have the potential to impact public health, safety, and the environment. We do bring those sites as much as we can up to Title 27 compliance. So just to get a little bit of terminology, you'll be hearing me kind of refer to sites in that way. Just a really quick figure of how a landfill works. Again, Redwood Shores Landfill is going to be a pre-88 site. And so you're not going to have the full extent of these kind of environmental controls. But just to share for informational purposes, a typical landfill, you'll have, cells of waste, but you'll also have a number of these kind of environmental control systems. You have already heard earlier about leachate collection, systems to control landfill gas. You have a series of monitoring wells to track the migration of landfill gas across these sites. And newer landfills now have something called a gas utilization plant, a way to harness the landfill gas that is captured on site, usually for repurposing for renewable energy sources. So really just kind of a figure to kind of introduce us to how a landfill works before we drill into the closure and then development of these landfills. And so closure is the process during which a landfill or disposal site no longer receives waste and is being prepared for post-closure maintenance according to an approved plan and construction schedule. You'll see here a number of the photos that we use in this presentation are going to be of sites within San Mateo County. This is a photo of the Muscle Rock site out in Daly City. So prior to development or post-closure development of these closed disposal sites, we do require preparation of regulatory submittals, and is typically accompanied by a county closed landfill post-closure development application. Application packets, usually include proof of CEQA compliance. You'll hear terms like the closure post-closure maintenance plan, post-closure development plan, post-closure land use plans, or Title 27 documents. A lot of different names for a full application or regulatory submittal that will include a lot of those controls that we'll talk about throughout this presentation. We've already talked about or heard about some of the agencies involved. You'll hear later on tonight from staff from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And then us here at Environmental Health, we are the primary agencies responsible for review of these Title 27 submittals, post-closure development applications, but a number of other supporting agencies, Cal Recycle, the Air Quality Management District, and other local agencies also have their role to play here. And then within San Mateo County, I do like to do a full enumeration of our post-closure development buildings in the county, and you'll see really just kind of a fun fact is that a lot of our post-closure development typically concentrated in just a few of our larger closed disposal sites. So I'll call out kind of the three major cities in San Mateo County. You're going to see South San Francisco and Brisbane, but you're also going to see Redwood City. The development of the Redwood Shores disposal site added some 20 buildings to our inventory there. And so you see that makes up a quite sizable portion of the inventory here in San Mateo County. As promised, we'll talk a little bit about the history, post-closure development then. For a lot of our pre-88 legacy disposal sites, it wasn't uncommon to have them used as non-irrigated open spaces. Think parks, think ball fields, not extensive development. And the challenge at the local level is managing kind of grandfathered developments. And as I mentioned, applying Title 27 compliance to new development or proposed redevelopment. And you'll see here, again, Muscle Rock, I believe we have the Belmont site, and then we do have the Home Depot, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So that Home Depot that you saw on the previous slide is going to be on the Unibracera landfill. This has the distinction of being, I believe, one of, if not the first registered post-closure development in the state of California. And here's just a brief history of it. I think we always like to spotlight the Home Depot on the Unibracera landfill because there were a lot of lessons learned there. We learned that over the course of construction, you're gonna have penetrations in the landfill. And so really we include this as a way to show the lessons learned with this very first development, at least for our team here in San Mateo County. And then we fast forward to what we consider more contemporary developments, and we're showcasing the Oyster Point site with the South San Francisco Municipal Dump, now known as Oyster Point. You'll see here the difference between a big warehouse Home Depot type development. We now see multi-phased development, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and these are going to be multi-building developments. Still on these, pre-regulation, pre-1988 closed disposal sites, and you'll see the extent of it. The dotted lines in that figure that you're seeing is going to be the refuse body, the closed disposal site, and the boundaries. This is where we started to make that distinction between what is on-site versus off-site, clarification for what is the permitted property boundary. But really just a sense of the scale of development. We're seeing a larger scale development and larger number of buildings on these post-closure developments. Animation shows, the future locations of these buildings. We're going to talk a little bit about engineering and design considerations. The Oyster Point site, a lot of it is going to be on fill, not just landfill, but kind of filled land usually is construction demolition debris. And so the importance of getting the engineer's perspective, those structural considerations, I thought this was just a really nifty map to show an overlay of, I believe this was 1947 and Oyster Point as we see it now. We're going to take a closer look at specifically section 21190. This is where we derive a lot of our post-closure development authority and those specific metrics that we look at when we're looking at proposed post-closure land use. An important note here is that responsibility ultimately lies with the current property owner or the developer to responsibly manage the development process. It's not uncommon for these sites to get regraded. You're going to see large amounts of earth movement to prepare the site for future development, ultimately to turn into what became kind of a 3-building complex here at Oyster Point. Aerial overview here. And just, kind of a sneak peek at some of the construction figures that we do take a look at. We look at the aerials, but we also look at what's underneath the sub-slab development. We're going to talk in a moment about those individual components of 21190 and what we're looking at specifically. And this is a good kind of representative overview of what those regulations translate into, how these developments are going to be mitigating accumulation of landfill gas, particularly methane, which is combustible, how these systems, primarily passive ventilation systems, are able to mitigate the concentration of methane before it makes its way inside these buildings. So we do, take a look at construction figures that are very specific to the design of what's going to be underneath these buildings that are placed on top of the landfill. More construction details here. We typically require hanger supported utilities, trench plugs, controls to mitigate, again, the landfill gas accumulation underneath these developments. Okay. More regulatory specifics here. We've highlighted some sections, specifically numbered 4 to 6, because we're going to have more photos in this presentation to kind of show us what perforated vent pipes look like in the permeable layer, venting pipes that are constructed with the ability to be connected to induced draft exhaust systems. And then we're going to take a look at the inside of these buildings. We do require that there are automatic methane gas sensors with an audible component, a horn strobe component inside the building when there are methane gas concentrations detected. So really just hopefully able to illustrate that with the controls that environmental health require, we're layering these controls. The idea is that there should never be detectable concentrations of methane above those permissible levels because of the layers of controls here. And, just going to provide some photos here to illustrate the sample here of the ventilation layer, and typically a gravel bed with geotextile and perforated piping in those trenches right there. Again, all in the name of ventilating accumulation of landfill gas and particularly methane from the subslab. Hanger supported ventilation pipes here. And then here's the landfill gas impermeable membrane. Ultimately, our concerns are if there are adequate or appropriate landfill gas mitigation measures. Consultants for the development that may not be experienced with construction on closed disposal sites, our regulations, or navigating complex multi-phase development. We also, again, we made that note that it's the ability of the property owners or the property management companies to incorporate responsible installation, monitoring, and repair of these environmental systems within their development plans, and a long-term responsibility for environmental systems after development is completed. We do have a number of regulatory submittals. Again, I mentioned the post-closure maintenance plan, operations, maintenance, and monitoring plans that govern the maintenance and monitoring of these developments. And so we have a lot of lessons learned here. It's the importance of our agency getting involved early, communicating early and often with responsible agencies, and then identifying compliance issues and working through them with the responsible parties. The importance of design engineer and project consultants. This is where it's outside of our, what Title 27 regulations require, but the importance of a selection of engineers that have experience with development on closed disposal sites. We might have construction companies that know how to put up, these multi-story buildings, but maybe companies that don't have experience with solid waste operations and landfill gas management, those vapor intrusion systems or landfill gas mitigation systems. So really putting this here to say that it is a multi-agency effort. You're going to see LEA involvement, regional board involvement, but we also rely on local level partners, but also the property owners themselves to identify consultants that are experienced and can continue San Mateo County's good history of responsible development on these closed disposal sites. More process driven. These slides are going to be from a Geocentech consultants. Really just, as a part of their kind of pre-construction meeting, this is a way for consultants to demonstrate to the regulatory agencies that they have that necessary experience that I talked about. It's an opportunity to have that open discussion and then to invite environmental health to participate during the environmental review process. So these slides are really just going to show that there's that clarity of thought in presenting a basis of design for development on a post-closure development. The slides here show that there's constant communications between developers and the regulatory agencies, and also a workflow. It's not lost on us that we have regulatory submittals that are approved, but with changing site conditions, it is important to keep environmental health and the regional board involved with design deviation and the mechanism by which regulatory agencies can review and approve these changes. I really like this figure because it does highlight all those controls that we talked about. We talked a little about the ventilation layer. The risk, of course, is methane intrusion and accumulation inside of a building. Mitigation measures should include the following components: a ventilation layer, highlighted in blue there, a vapor barrier or landfill gas impermeable membrane, system of ventilation, usually in that subslab layer, ventilation layer, and then it goes up to the vent risers, where you'll see those components of the rain cap, wind-driven turbine. And then inside these buildings, we have methane sensors. You'll see here in this figure, gas is going up, captured in the ventilation layer there. And of course, if we do see accumulation of methane above permissible levels, we call this a lower explosive limit, audible horns and strobes that do go off. So just a nice little demonstration of all that. And of course, we talked a little bit about building inspection criteria. Ultimately, the goal is to mitigate gas accumulation, to have a system by which we have gas sensors that go off, the audible component, and then methane gas monitoring on a routine basis, and a way to catch differential settlement. This happens over the course of time on these landfill sites. These are the active systems, those blowers, and also the vent risers that we talked about. Vent risers on a development, those wind-driven turbines and rain caps, and then a control panel for the methane sensors. Newer systems nowadays all connect to single control panel or panels. And this is where we get a live read of methane concentrations throughout the developments. And this is a part of our routine annual inspection that environmental health conducts of all the buildings on our closed disposal sites. Good signage with a site map and also emergency response protocol. More photos within our developments. This is a picture on the right of a horn strobe system, and then one of our methane sensors with gas being applied to it on the left. And so hopefully that's a good overview of post-closure development, some of the samples that we'll see here in San Mateo County, and the role of our agency. We'll be saving questions for later, but I will turn it over to the rest of the panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan, for that fantastic presentation. We do have a few questions that have definitely popped up that, as you just mentioned, we'll get to after this next presentation from Alan Friedman from the county. I'm sorry, from the Water Board. You're from the county, aren't you? So I'm going to turn it over to you, Alan, to go ahead and do your presentation. Welcome.
Am I sharing my screen? I thought you were going to.
Nope, the screen is up for you right now. You're ready to go.
Okay, very good. I can't multitask. Can't speak and run the program at the same time. Well, folks, my name is Alan Friedman, and I'm an engineer at the Regional Water Quality Control Board, Region 2, located in Oakland. I'm in the land disposal program. I've worked for the board for quite a few years. The picture you showed at the beginning was taken many years ago. I do not look like that anymore. But briefly tonight, I'll give you a quick briefing on what our land disposal program does in general, with a particular focus on the Westport landfill. Some of this information may strike you as somewhat general and maybe slightly repetitive from what you've already heard, but forgive me, I simply want to point out that this is a regulated site in the past and will continue to be so, regardless of what level of development takes place. Next slide, please. The land disposal program with Water Board gets its authority from a portion of the California Code of Regulations, which was issued in 1997. This is the primary set of state regulations that govern disposal of non-hazardous solid waste to land. There are three primary goals of this program, mainly to ensure that waste is properly contained, that there's no leakage or discharge of waste material to waters, and that the public and the environment are both equally protected. Next slide, please. Primarily, we regulate sites where solid waste is either actively being disposed of or where land disposal has previously occurred in the past. There's a number of different sites that our office regulates, and these include conventional municipal solid waste landfills, which are the landfills that receive household or commercial waste. Landfills that only accept inert waste such as soil and construction and demolition debris. There's also designated solid waste management units that are generally located in industrial facilities. These are properties such as petroleum refineries and chemical plants. And these facilities receive industrial process waste. Wastewater storage ponds, which are used to store sludges and other process wastes, and old mine sites, which are prevalent throughout California, which often have piles of mine tailings or waste rocks, which the previous owners left behind after the mining ended. Our office does not actively oversee active mining operations or hazardous waste sites. The latter is left to the purview of the Department of Toxic Substances Control, also known as DTSC. We also regulate composting operations, many of which are located in active landfills. And lastly, our office regulates, oversees, and monitors any releases to soil or water that come from any of the before mentioned sites. Next slide, please. This is a map which shows closed landfills throughout our region. This does not show the 11 active landfills in our region. It does show the approximately 58 closed landfills. And that blue line you can see on the periphery of the bay is the legal boundary of our region. The closed landfills are denoted by the green squares, and even a casual observant will note that they are typically located in the bayfront. They date back to the days when it was considered honorable, acceptable, or tolerable to fill in marshes and wetlands and hopefully put them to some beneficial purpose. This is a historic manner of waste disposal from ancient Egypt and Rome on. You go to the edge of town and dump waste. You know, regardless as wetlands and have a higher purpose for them. It also should be noted that almost all these older bayfront landfills are unlined, and the Westport landfill, the subject of tonight's hearing, is one of the closed landfills that we regulate. The next slide, please. Clearly, you don't have to know a lot about this topic to realize that disposal of waste to landfills certainly has the potential to adversely impact water quality. There's at least 4 main threats to water quality from landfilling activities, such as the possibility of runoff of stormwater that has come into contact with waste, the potential for releases of landfill leachate and gas condensate. These are materials that generate over time in landfills, primarily due to the decomposition of waste or from water infiltrating to the waste. And these materials can potentially discharge to ground or surface waters. And other potential problems, the catastrophic failure of landfill slopes or liners. And lastly, the potential for cap erosion, which can expose the underlying waste. There's a number of measures that we require landfill owners and operators to take to mitigate these threats, such as proper stormwater management, proper management of landfill liners and covers, implementing best management practices, and implementing appropriate water quality monitoring to make sure that all above are suitably taken care of. Next slide, please. With respect to the Westport landfill, this was, as you've heard before, a tidal marshland until approximately 1910. Upon being diked off from tidal inundation, it became diked pasture and farmland to approximately 1948. And then from 1948 to 1970, it was used for the unlined refuse disposal of approximately 650,000 cubic yards of non-hazardous material. This ranged from municipal solid waste, construction debris, glass, plastic, wood, rock fragments, incinerator ash, a little bit of everything. Again, like many of the older landfills in our region, it is unlined. Belmont Slough is located along the western and northern boundaries of the site. And as you heard before, another large slough formerly meandered through the site but has been subsequently filled. Next slide, please. There are a number of regulatory measures that the Regional Water Board has taken with respect to the Westport landfill. It was closed for waste disposal in 1970, and 6 years later, in 1976, the Regional Water Board adopted our first order, what we call waste discharge requirements, or WDRs for short, which require the site owners to place a final cover of at least 4 feet of compacted inert fill material over the entirety of the waste. This cover is graded to prevent ponding, and a drainage system was installed to collect runoff. 3 leachate collection trenches totaling 4,200 feet in length were then installed to collect and pump out leachate impacted groundwater to the local sewage treatment plant. And in 1994, a perimeter cutoff wall was built, which connected the cover with the underlying bay mud to further prevent the release of contaminated water. Lastly, landfill gas and venting, as previously mentioned, were also installed. Next slide, please. Well, as you've heard today, On top of the closed landfill, the Bayshore Technology Park was built, which consisted of 22-story office buildings. The overall site is within the community of Redwood Shores. Many of the listeners are no doubt residents there, which is also built in former marshes beginning more than 100 years ago. Levees were built to prevent tidal inundation, and in 2010, more than 3 miles of the surrounding levees were raised. Leachate continues to be pumped out to the local treatment plant. The groundwater is monitored semi-annually at 23 wells, with common detections being volatile and semi-volatile organic compounds, PCBs, and ammonia. It should be noted that the occurrence of these materials is fairly common with other closed landfills that accepted a variety of wastes, such as this site did. Next slide, please. Now, there are two main issues which face the Westport landfill coming into the future. As already noted, while it's already developed, you have a proposal for increased development at this landfill. Of course, landfill redevelopment is not unique to this site. While many of our closed landfills are reused simply as open space and recreational parks, at least 10 of our closed landfills have been extensively redeveloped for commercial purposes. Constructing buildings on top of former landfills is a challenge, but obviously not impossible. The challenging part is because one can't simply plop a building on top of the land surface because it's uneven and unstable, and the increased weight of building causes subsidence through the degradation of waste within the landfill, creating an undulating surface that grows, unfortunately, even more uneven over time. To successfully build a landfill on top of the landfill, the developer has to install structural piles through the waste mass and into the underlying geologic material. Clearly, poking holes through the middle of the landfill, which is essentially what a pile does, greatly increases the potential for the release of materials such as leachate. Fortunately, there are a number of engineering methods to seal these holes to prevent such release. And most of our redeveloped landfills located in the bayfront were built over a very thick layer of bay mud, which thankfully is also somewhat self-sealing. The second major issue, as you've heard, which faces the Westport landfills, the potential for sea level rise. Our agency has been taking steps to make sure that other low elevation landfills are preparing for the eventual effects of sea level rise, which is definitely an issue with this landfill. Next slide, please. I'm returning to the slide that you saw before, indicating the closed landfills around the bay. Those green small squares again. Most of these closed landfills are located along the bay margin, and most, if not all of these, along with a few that exist on the coast, are at best within a few feet above mean sea level, and they're therefore increasingly vulnerable to any amount of sea level rise predicted to occur within the next century. This includes the Westport landfill. In October 2022, our office issued a general waste discharge requirements amendment, which required 16 bayfront landfills, including the Westport landfill, submit long-term flood protection plans. These plans were intended to require the owners to identify what vulnerability they have to sea level rise and what steps they would take in response. The Westport landfill submitted theirs in October 2023, and the plan described how the landfill will be protected during anticipated sea level rise. This includes both surface water impacts and the potential rise from groundwater. What steps will they take? What steps they can take to protect the landfill cap, to update site sewer systems, and look at to the extent to which surrounding levels might need to be raised as well. This is a proposal which needs to be periodically reviewed in the future, so it's not a one and done. The potential for sea level rise is something that will be have to be visited in the future. In summary, I hope that I could, in this brief talk, illustrate that we recognize the threats that closed landfills such as the Westport landfill pose, and that the regulation that we've put in place in the past will continue in the future, regardless of whatever level of development is proposed here. That ends my comments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you both, Allens, for those great presentations. So as promised, we've now dedicated a good chunk of time here to respond to as many questions as we can here. There's been some awesome and detailed questions coming in through the Q&A. So Troy, I'm just going to ask you to stop sharing screen so everyone could kind of see each other. And I'm going to go ahead and go through as many of these questions as I can. I might jump around a little bit, mainly to give our panelists a chance to breathe before we go on to other questions. And then if we need to bring up slides for reference, please feel free to ask for that, Alan Friedman or Alan C. You have access to that yourself. So the first question I'm going to ask is for Alan from the county. And this question is from Nina related to when there are violations related to gas methane mitigation system, what is the process to address those issues? And when or how are members of the community notified that required satisfactory evidence demonstrating community safety from the landfill gas mitigation hazards? How are they notified in that case? I know those are two kind of lumped in questions, but I want to give you a chance to answer that. Over to you, Alan.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. And I know that we do have a number of the folks in the community who have reached out to our office. And so why I know that there is a pretty high baseline of knowledge when it comes to disposal sites. To answer the first question, which is just, hey, if there are violations or deficiencies noted, what is that process? Typically within our office, we will, and I guess for our agency, we have what's typically referred to as kind of areas of concern or violations. And so if something rises to the level of a violation, the standard corrective action protocol is to establish a corrective action timeline. I think depending on what the corrective action is, a typical timeline could be anywhere from 30 days to a little bit longer, especially if it requires repair of one of those engineered systems or those components that might take a little bit longer to fix. But yeah, it usually starts with issuance of some kind of a citation or notice of violation, and then a clearly defined kind of corrective action. I think if this is Nina's question that you're referencing, Nina has done her homework and is referencing a relatively recent citation of ours, November 2024. I believe that would be the annual inspection of the disposal site. And so specific to that, yes, we do have, in our currently undergoing review, a corrective action plan. And this was, we talked a bit about operators and landowners. This is going to be with conversations with Longfellow Real Estate Partners. They did submit a corrective action plan. We're reviewing that right now for adequacy. And that's really where the dialogue begins, right? Is it sufficient to close out the violation, or do we have to have further dialogue? As far as kind of public messaging, we don't really have a mechanism by which we kind of, announce or make public that information. As Nina is well aware, our Swiss reports are public record. That's likely how members of the public are able to access that and to inform themselves with the latest, with what our agency sees. And so we provide visibility that way, but there isn't a mechanism by which we kind of inform specific communities. But all our inspection reports are on the public record. Dave, you'll have to help me. Hopefully that addressed the two main components of that question.
Yep, I believe so. Thank you. And I'm actually going to pose one more set of questions all related to the same topic to you, and then Alan Friedman and Keith, I'm going to come to you next. So Steve had asked if you can define the post-88 closures again, just to I guess make sure that's clear. And if there's a list of the different standards between post 88 and now. And lastly, who is responsible for ensuring compliance before and after construction?
Dave, is that for this Alan or for other Alan?
I was really coming to you, but it could be both. If you both want to jump in, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll speak with my understanding of the regulations. Just for a peek under the hood, different units at the state and CalRecycle support us depending on the different sites, and so that's really where that distinction comes in. I wanted to bring that up more so to highlight that the sites that have closed prior to the closure regulations won't have those formally defined closure plans or closure permits as we understand it today for our active disposal sites. And then, of course, and I think I mentioned this during the presentation, though, anytime there is a significant redevelopment or significant change that has the potential to impact health and safety, then, you know, our agency does try to bring these developments who maybe if they closed prior to that point or have been developed, you know, years ago, we do try to bring them up to a more current Title 27 standard. And that's using the standards of those newer developments that, you know, we consider more responsibly developed, have more robust systems. You know, back in the day, they used to use kind of wall, you know, the plug and play methane sensors. Now we have much more sophisticated systems wired to control panels with digital readouts. It's no longer those kind of plugged, you know, the technology has come a long way. So that's really where I wanted to make that distinction. But at a state level, it's which unit will support our local agency for technical review and kind of a guidance or regulatory support.
Great. Thank you for that. And we could have a follow-up if needed, but that's really helpful. So a question for Alan and maybe Keith here from the Water Board. How does changing sea levels and water table impact the landfill? And will the water level be within the landfill? And how accurate are the regional mapping for groundwater on the site? That's a question from Gita. Thank you, Gita. Over to you, Alan.
Rising sea level, I mean, it has two aspects. One is potential overtopping during surface water events, and it also leads to potential for rising groundwater within the landfill itself. Both are a potential problem, and the plan, the long-term flood protection plan that the landfill submitted last year looked at both aspects and recognized that they had to be addressed. So many people think that rising sea level just means that you get a high king tide, your parking lot floods, but the rising groundwater levels are a potential problem as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Alan. I'm going to pose another question that might be for any or all panelists to respond to, but Gita also asked, are there some characteristics that would render a landfill less suitable for redevelopment because of sea level rise in an unlined site, or groundwater rise, or problem/history of uneven settlement, or a number of penetrations given unstable cap that need to be evaluated? Long question. Let me know if I need to reread or repose it again, but I'd really up to any or all of you all to be able to respond to.
This is Keith Roberson. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Keith.
Yeah, I'm also with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. I'm the Land Disposal Program Manager. And, you know, I would just put out there that within our region, we've seen about a dozen landfills that have been redeveloped for commercial purposes, some more extensively than others. Alan Chu showed some photographs of the Junipero Serra landfill in Colma, with the Home Depot on it. I believe he's correct. That was the first landfill in the state of California that had a commercial development on top of it. That landfill is inland. It's at a fairly high elevation, and it's not subject to sea level rise issues. But I think almost all of the other landfills within our region that have been developed are right on the bay. All of those are subject to sea level rise. And that would include, off the top of my head, I can think of the San Rafael landfill, which is a Target store. It's literally right on the bay. The Shoreline Amphitheater in Mountain View is built on top of the old Mountain View landfill, also right on the bayfront. Like I said, pretty much all the other developed landfills are right on the bay. And, I probably would say that some might be less suitable for redevelopment than others, but they pretty much all face the same challenges. One of the ways that new developments are handling sea level rise is they're looking at projections of how much the sea level will rise. And I know the Oyster Point landfill is the new buildings that are being built are built at a significant elevation, something like 10 feet above the current sea level in anticipation of rising sea levels. Groundwater rise is going to be an issue, but I would mention that most of these old bayfront landfills were built on top of bay mud, and the waste, just through the sheer weight of the waste, that the bay mud acts kind of as a plastic, and it has been pushed down below the level of the sea level. And most of those old bayfront landfills, the waste is already flooded with groundwater. Groundwater level is expected to rise, but it'll just be compounding a problem that already exists.
Great, thank you for that, Keith. I don't know if either Alan's had anything to add, but that was a great response. Thank you. Another question that really could be for anyone. This is from Nina asking, could regulators please advise why landfill waste characterization and delineation is contingent only upon approval of redevelopment when new state environmental protections require identifying PFAS in connection with unlined landfills? Who would like to take a pass at that?
Well,
Either.
again, this is
Yep.
Keith. I would mention that landfill waste characterization and delineation is not contingent only upon approval of redevelopment. We require those things whether a site's redeveloped or not. And with regard to the identifying PFAS in landfills, within our region, we sent out an order about 4 or 5 years ago requiring 29 landfills within our region to sample for PFAS. That included the 11 active landfills and 18 closed landfills. And, we required that whether the landfill had been developed or not really had nothing to do with our decision to require that PFAS characterization. I will mention that PFAS was found in virtually every landfill that looked for it. In leachate, a lot of the landfills also detected PFAS compounds in groundwater.
Thank you, Keith. Can you actually define PFAS just for those that don't know what that stands for? What
It's
that means?
per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances or something like that. They're
Yeah.
a class of thousands of different chemicals that have particular properties. Typically, anything that resists water or makes something slippery, like a Teflon surface on a cooking pan or a raincoat, PFAS are applied to mattresses to make them fire retardant. Also, a lot of the foams that are used to put out fires contain PFAS chemicals.
Great. Thank you for that. Very, very helpful. I feel like I'm at trivia night and I'm throwing wild trivia questions at you all. You're doing a great job answering, so thank you so much. I believe this question is for Alan at the county. Question is, where does the methane gas go? Does it go up in the air or over the neighborhoods that are living nearby? And what happens to the neighborhoods what happens to neighborhood as alarms go off? I'm not sure if that question is clear, but maybe if you could answer that first part of that question from Francis.
Yeah, so I'll start by kind of responding broadly and then focusing specifically on Redwood Shores. And again, the reason to consider, when these disposal sites were active is with a typical landfill, you would expect to see, as far as landfill gas monitoring, our active disposal sites, for example, have a perimeter gas monitoring network. And that's a series of monitoring wells along the entire perimeter of the site, the permitted boundary. And that is to detect the horizontal migration of landfill gas. And it's typically methane because of the combustibility hazard. And really that's the one that we check for. And these perimeter monitoring probes act as kind of that check for migration of gas. And that's broadly speaking. Why I want to make the distinction between sites now and sites then is those legacy disposal sites where folks maybe found a hole, put trash in it, called it a dump. A lot of them didn't have those perimeter monitoring networks. Some sites do, some sites don't. Specific to Redwood Shores, there is not one, but they do have a series of extraction trenches that a third-party company, Arcadis, does monitor. And these are extraction trenches designed to kind of capture movement of landfill gas. And so there's a monitoring port. And then similar to that active riser design that I showed in my slide, it's kind of it looks like kind of just a stick in the parking lot with a wind-driven turbine at the top. And so different sites will have different ways to track that. And again, why it's important to consider, hey, how old is this landfill? And why, as we have these concerns, we then say, hey, how can we, when we're looking at redevelopment, maybe build in some of our additional controls? And that might be in continuous monitoring in the ventilation layer. There's new technologies that I've seen where folks are building that into design to say, hey, now we can see what gas concentrations look like underneath the buildings, not just in the buildings, because by the time it's in these structures, it's already too late. Maybe putting it a little lower. And why we always encourage that dialogue and how can we responsibly develop it. And you'll see me use those terms like that to account for that legacy determination where we might not have all the monitoring points that we want, but we try to build them in as these sites get developed.
Great, thank you so much for that. I'm just going to do a quick time check here. We were kind of scheduled between 7 and 8:30, but there's quite a few questions here left. We're going to try to get through here as many as we can. We might go a bit over, and we really respect the panelists' time, if that's okay, to be able to answer a few more of these questions. And Alan from the county, I'm going to come right back to you. You might have already answered some of these questions, but Steve notes that they live right next to the landfill and the cap is directly along their property line. And they don't have any of the protections that were mentioned. And they're just kind of curious if there's anything they can do. I think you kind of referenced some of that as you went through your presentation or otherwise, but I'll give you a quick opportunity to respond to that.
Yeah, I think I very briefly mentioned it. I think I had a bullet there that references this on-site versus off-site determination. And really that's just the limitations of our regulations. These Title 27 controls we say need to be implemented on-site, on the disposal site, and within the permitted boundary of the landfill. So, it sounds like gentleman here is off the cap or off-site. I guess, to use my same definition. And so, there has been discussion, right? To what extent can we have folks voluntarily build in some of these? But as far as, enforcement agencies or regulatory agencies are concerned, and it's not the perfect answer, but, the regulations are what we can require. And the rest is just working with our local partners to spread that level of awareness, having sessions like this to have opportunities to discuss with the public. That's the response that I got. I know it's not the perfect response, but that's what I got tonight.
Great, thank you so much, Alan. So I have a question back for you, Alan Friedman. So a question from Nina. The most recent 2024 groundwater monitoring well reports continue to indicate that VOCs and SVOC contaminants that exceed control levels, that there are some that exceed control levels. Given these ongoing threats, what health and safety regulatory implementation measures can sensitive receptors presently rely on as well as in the future?
Well, generally speaking, we haven't seen groundwater sections that pose a threat to the off-site environment or human health. I mean, but monitoring is an ongoing exercise. It's semi-annual monitoring that will continue as long as we feel the waste pose a threat to the public environment, which could be a very long time. There's no particular timetable as far as when the monitoring will cease. And furthermore, with the prospect of increased development out there, again, as I mentioned, the construction activities driving additional piles runs the possibility of discharge and liberation of groundwater and leachate. They have to assure the public that this can be done without causing an environmental problem out there. So the regulation of the site will continue.
Great, thank you, Alan. And one more question for you is how many of the closed landfills which have been redeveloped recently are surrounded by residential communities and or development that you know of?
Probably all of them. Will Rogers just mentioned that you should invest in land because they're not making more of it. These developments are driven by real estate prices, and they're surrounded by commercial and residential areas. So many of the concerns and issues the Redwood Shores people face are common to other areas too.
Got it, thank you. And Alan C. County, I'm going to come back to you. You might have again answered some of this already, but kind of paraphrasing one of these questions is what happens when there is a leak on a site, and are there any noticing requirements for neighborhood residents? I think we might have gotten into a little bit of that, but wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Yeah, I think if by leak they mean kind of there's detected concentrations of methane. Really the hazard then would be if we can detect it in structure, there's in structure accumulation, then the hazard would be mostly with the occupants in the building, less outside. The idea is if it goes into the atmosphere, then it won't be at combustible concentrations generally. So the hazard's kind of restricted to the building occupants, and why we do ask that we have a comprehensive enunciation system. I showed you the regulations. They just ask that there is a horn and strobe system. Our agency goes a step further and really kind of puts a fine tip on that and says it needs to be audible to all building occupants. And we need to be able to address that. These building uses are evolving with the course of time. It's no longer one tenant, one building. Sometimes it's one building, 5 or 10 tenants. And so if we're going to kind of create these walls or divide up these buildings, our ask is that every tenant in those buildings have the capacity to at least hear these horns and strobes so that there can be an evacuation protocol initiated if it's at those levels. With these systems, typically, and this is a generalization, we typically see a low-level condition, low-level alert condition, and a high-level alarm. And so, we don't prescribe, hey, this is the specific evacuation protocol. We usually have folks prepare some kind of emergency action plan. They submit it to our agency and we review it. And, if it doesn't quite check out, then we'll provide our feedback. And why it's, the importance of the dialogue between developers, but also the design engineers, all parties involved, and why it's important for environmental health to be involved so that we can be a part of that process, so that we can share those lessons learned. But as a direct answer, if there is a leak or accumulation of methane in the structures, that doesn't necessarily mean that, all the buildings in the area are impacted. It's just going to be that one structure where we did have a detectable concentration.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I do have a couple more questions here. I'm realizing a lot of the questions that have come up, or some of them, the team is doing a great job in answering those directly through the Q&A. But there was a question, again, could be for the entire panel, of what requirements are there for offsite impacts, whether gas, leachate, or other impacts? Who would like to take a crack at that one?
Would you mind reading the question again?
Sure. What requirements are there for off-site impacts, whether being gas, leachate, or other impacts?
Well, the permit or waste discharge requirements we have for the landfill, which attaches to the current and any future owner, is pretty clear. Leachate cannot be discharged off-site, period. If there is that potential, the landfill owner has a direct and immediate responsibility to abate that. The whole purpose of a closed landfill is the waste and any materials encountered with the waste are to stay in place.
Got it. Thank you. Let's see, Troy, I don't want to let you off the hook. We did have one question for you as well. If you could explain or clarify the groundwater dash line in the landfill section that you showed.
Sure. Yeah, why don't I go ahead and bring up that slide really quick, just so we can take a quick look at that. So here again is just a cross section of the Westport landfill, and I've highlighted in even larger font the groundwater line. You can see it in the dashed blue. That's the groundwater table as it currently exists according to the flood protection plan, which was recently submitted to the water board. So it just shows, that groundwater is underneath the refuse and underneath the cap, but does, as Alan and Keith mentioned, there is a potential for that groundwater to rise as sea level rise impacts the site. But that's part of the reason why the groundwater monitoring wells are in place to be aware of that risk.
Great. Thank you so much, Troy. Team, unless I'm missing, and I'm talking to my internal team that's been doing an awesome job of tracking all these questions for me to pose to the panel, is there anything that I've missed that we want to highlight? If not, we've magically come to the end of time here as well. But yes, Keith.
I was just wondering, are we going to have the opportunity to respond to these questions after the meeting is over?
Great question. Sure. Yeah. If you wanted to respond in greater detail afterwards, we can send these questions around. We are going to put together a very detailed summary of this meeting. Every one of these info sessions become a resource that then gets posted to the project website along with this video recording and the presentations. So we would love your help in any additional response that you might have. The team has been typing out the answers that you all have given verbally as well, and we could definitely pass that around. And for all those that have dialed in, we just want to make it super clear that this is going to be extremely transparent. All of the questions and comments that were posed will be provided back out to everyone that participated and everyone who didn't, so they can get a sense of the conversation that was had and any answers that we do have to questions. So thank you for that question, Keith. That would be excellent if you would like to help us answer additional questions in further detail if we haven't here tonight. Otherwise, I think we've got some just general comments that have come in as well, that again will be part of the summary itself. And then any questions that maybe we didn't get to that were either unrelated to this presentation that we'll hopefully get to at future info sessions that we do have coming up, primarily related to the sensitivity analysis that could be related. We'll have an opportunity to answer those then. Otherwise, again, I'm going to just pose to the internal team here if there's anything that I missed. Otherwise, Troy, I don't know if you want to bring the slides back up to recognize what's coming. And I just wanted to say a wholehearted thank you to the panel for being part of this presentation and the fantastic presentations that you did give. And back over to you, Troy.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, as I mentioned before, we've got a couple things lined up. 2 more webinars. The next one is going to be focused on the sensitivity analysis. So preliminary traffic, utilities, and environmental impacts. As we posted those results online on the website. So feel free to please review those beforehand and come prepared for a robust discussion on the 30th. There'll be another webinar on February 6th that'll focus on life sciences. We'll have our next workshop on the 12th at the library. There'll be an online survey associated with that. And then on March 4th, there'll be an update to the City Council. All right. And with that, I think Dave will, if they're barring any further comments from our panel, again, thanks panel greatly for participating. And thanks for all those who came and listened and posed questions. We really appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you at one of our upcoming events.
That's right. Thank you so much, all. Thank you again for joining us. We'll be back in touch with a summary again of this meeting. You get notices about that, and we hope to see you at a future forum coming up soon. Take care, all. Have a fantastic night.
Have a good evening.